cloak of a thick pre-dawn fog in Crimea, Russian soldiers meticulously unloaded a $2 million 48N6 missile from a transport truck. Believing themselves safe after weeks of Ukrainian attacks on their S-400 sites, they were blind to the true threat. 30 feet above the Black Sea, a 10-pound Wild Hornet FPV drone, guided by a distant Leica 100, was just 78 seconds away from transforming their precious resupply into a fiery inferno. Trap was set. At 03:48 a.m. in Crimea, a Russian crew was meticulously offloading a $2 million 48N6 missile from a transport truck. For countless weeks, Ukraine had been systematically bleeding their S-400 sites dry. This precious resupply, delivered under the cloak of a thick pre-dawn fog, was the lifeblood they so desperately craved. They felt secure. They believed they were invisible. They had no idea that 30 feet above the Black Sea, a 10-pound assassin was only 78 seconds from turning their prized possession into a blazing fireball of shredded steel. The mastermind of this operation was a Ukrainian Leica 100 drone, a patient predator that had silently observed these exact trucks as they crawled from a depot inside Crimea. It watched them wait for the fog, convinced it was their impenetrable shield. The delivery system for this operation was the Magura V5, an 18-foot robotic boat that had slipped past Russia's naval patrols, carrying 3 Wild Hornet FPV drones. The total cost of this mission was approximately $280,000. Russia was about to pay over $12 million for a brutal lesson in asymmetric warfare. On paper, the Russians held dominion over this territory. Their Podlet K-1 radar was meant to see everything within a 25-mile radius. Their Panzer S-1 missile systems were the ever-vigilant guard dogs ready to tear apart anything that moved. Their Kasuka-4 jammer was designed to render the sky an electronic dead zone. But Ukraine was not adhering to their rules. They were not assaulting the fortress head-on. They were attacking the delivery boy at the back gate. The objective wasn't merely to disable a radar. It was to cripple Russia's capacity to heal, to prove that any attempt to reinforce this hemorrhaging fortress would be met with a swift, brutal, and embarrassingly inexpensive counterpunch. The Russians thought the fog would conceal their resupply. They were about to discover it was the perfect cover for the hunters. At 03:52 a.m., the Magura AV-5, having navigated over 100 miles from a clandestine inlet near Odisha, cut its main engine. It now sat just 15 meters out, a ghostly figure in the pre-dawn fog. The signal flashed across the Starlink feed from the Leica 100, a specter in the clouds miles above the target, static and observing. Resupply in progress. The 10-minute window had begun to shrink. With a flurry of keystrokes, the operator unleashed hell. Compressed air launched all 3 Wild Hornets from the launch rail in quick succession. They stabilized instantly, then plummeted, skimming the waves at a breathtaking 30 feet. They were now flying phantoms, physically hidden below the Podlet radar's line of sight by the curvature of the Earth. It seems simple enough. The problem is, you don't need to see a drone to destroy it. Russia's Krasuka-4 electronic warfare system creates a 50-mile bubble of jamming so intense it can scramble a drone's receiver into useless static. But the Ukrainians had a plan for this. The drones weren't relying on a simple radio link. They were employing a military-grade frequency hopping system that changes channels 500 times per second across a wide spectrum. It was like trying to hit a single mole in a whack-a-mole game where the mole was teleporting between 1,000 different holes every second. The Russians had learned to counter that too, with broad-spectrum noise, so Ukraine added a final, lethal layer. Once the drones received the final target coordinates from the operator, they switched to a fully autonomous AI terminal guidance package. The drone stopped listening to the operator entirely. It used its onboard sensors to fly the last few miles and execute the strike on its own. You can't jam a drone that isn't listening. At 03:54 a.m., the 2-minute flight time to the target area began. The Magura V-5, its primary duty complete, peeled away and commenced its silent 100-mile retreat back to Odessa. The Hornets were now on their own, 3 intelligent bullets rocketing toward their prey. They had a plan to defeat the eyes and a plan to defeat the electronic ghost. But what happens when they encounter the guard dog? At 03:56 hours, a single unexpected blip flashed on the Podlet K1 radar screen. It appeared for less than a second at an altitude of 200 feet, then vanished completely. The Russian operator, Sergei, jolted upright. His system was designed to track persistent threats, not ghosts. He followed protocol, attempting to get a lock on the ghost's last known coordinates. Nothing. The target was gone. He had just witnessed the opening move in Ukraine's deadly chess match. The lead Wild Hornet's AI had deliberately hopped into the radar's view for an instant before diving back down to 30 feet. Why? To confirm the radar was active and to say hello. Sergei cursed and switched to his Panzer's optical and thermal cameras, slowly directing the powerful sensors toward the bearing of the vanished contact. He was hunting now, his eyes scanning the grainy, fog-shrouded landscape on the screen. And that was the problem. His multi-million-dollar imager was designed to lock onto the blazing heat of a fighter jet's engine. A 10-pound battery-powered drone emitted less thermal energy than a rabbit. It was invisible in the noise. He saw nothing, heard nothing. His screens told him the sky was clear. Yet, out in the darkness, 3 intelligent bullets were now less than a mile away and closing fast. He was a guard dog barking at a phantom, utterly unaware the true threat was already inside the fence. At 03:57 a.m., suddenly, 2 new contacts exploded onto Sergei's screen. These were no ghosts. They were large, clear, and moving fast at an altitude of 300 feet. The system identified them as potential Bayraktar-class drones. He achieved an immediate target lock. With a flick of a switch, 2 57E6 missiles rocketed off the rails. $4 million of Russian fury screaming into the fog. Seconds later, 2 bright flashes on the thermal imager. Targets destroyed. The system reported, and a surge of adrenaline and pride hit him. But he hadn't destroyed 2 Bayraktars. He had just vaporized empty air. This was the core of the whisper sting tactic, and it was brilliantly devious. High above the battlefield, the Leica 100 wasn't just watching, it was conducting. It relayed the exact position and bearing of the Panzer's radar to the Hornet's Kortitsia AI. The AI then commanded the first 2 drones to execute a deception climb, briefly hopping to 300 feet while activating a small electronic amplifier. This device made their tiny 0.05-meter radar signature bloom into something 10 times larger, perfectly mimicking a much bigger threat. It's a classic magic trick. Force the audience to watch your right hand wave a giant, flashy cape while your left hand is already in their pocket. And while Sergei was staring at his screen, convinced he was a hero for shooting down 2 phantoms, the third Wild Hornet, the real killer, had just slipped past his defenses completely undetected. It now had a wide-open, undefended path straight to the heart of the Russian network. At 03:58 a.m., the ruse had worked perfectly on the Ukrainian operator's screen. The path to the Podlet radar was now a clean, straight line. The 2 decoys bought him a golden opportunity, but there was a problem no one had anticipated. The 2 Panzer missiles exploded, leaving a brief but intense cloud of hot gas and debris over the coast, temporarily disrupting the Hornet's infrared sensors. This thermal ghost was now drifting directly into the third Hornet's flight path, blinding its infrared sensors at the most critical moment. The easy shot had just become a flight through a hurricane of fire and sensor noise. Back in the command vehicle, Sergei's pride turned to cold dread. 2 perfect kills, but the attack felt wrong. Too easy. His commander agreed. An order flashed across the network. Activate Kasuka 4, maximum power. Find the source. The air crackled with invisible energy. Simultaneously, a Katrin hunter-killer drone was launched from a nearby pad. Its cameras slaved to the Kasuka's direction-finding sensors, tasked with finding and destroying whatever was out there. At 03:59 hours, this was the moment the Ukrainians had been waiting for. High above, the Leica 100 saw it all. The blinding thermal cloud, the surging energy of the Kasuka, the launch of the Katrin. It relayed a single pre-planned command. Miles away on the deck of the retreating Magura V5, a final system sputtered to life. The 20-pound fog generator began pumping out a thick, dense cloud of artificial fog, releasing a river of white into the existing mist. It was a tactical masterpiece. The cool, dense fog rapidly dispersed the hot thermal cloud from the missile explosions, clearing the third Hornet's infrared sensors. Simultaneously, it created a 5 mm wide wall of impenetrable white, making it impossible for the Katrin or Sergei's remaining sensors to get a lock. Russia thought they were fighting a drone. They just found out they were fighting the weather itself. At 04:00 a.m., the Hornet's camera, once a mess of thermal noise, snapped into crystal clarity. The cool, artificial fog had done its job perfectly, acting like a fire extinguisher on the blinding heat from the missile explosions. The path was open, but the mission just got infinitely harder. High above, the Leica 100's wide-angle view showed the Russian convoy was no longer static. They were panicking. The trucks carrying the fresh S-400 missiles were lumbering away in different directions at a clumsy 10 mm, a desperate attempt to scatter and present multiple targets. Inside the Panzer command vehicle, Sergei was now completely blind, and that made him dangerous. He fired again on instinct. 2 more $100,000 missiles launched into the impenetrable wall of white fog, chasing echoes and ghosts. In a final act of desperation, the order flashed across the Russian network. Activate Nebo-M. The giant long-range radar began its slow, deliberate power-up sequence. It was a final, desperate gamble. The problem for them was it took precious minutes to come online, and even then, its gaze was fixed on the heavens, utterly useless against a threat that was already inside the house. The Ukrainian operator's heart was hammering against his ribs at 120 beats per minute. He was juggling multiple feeds: the Hornet's pilot view, the Leica's God's Eye view, and the rapidly changing positions of the targets. The Leica's laser designator painted a tiny invisible dot on the canvas roof of the lead truck. The one carrying 4 brand-new $2 million apiece S-400 missiles. The AI needed a final command. He made the call. Engage Target 1. The Cortizia AI took full control, instantly processing the laser data from the Leica. It ignored the panicked firing of the Panzer. It ignored the other fleeing trucks. Its only mission was to turn $8 million of advanced Russian weaponry into a fireball. 10 seconds to impact. The Hornet's flight fins made micro-adjustments, calculating the intercept vector for the slow-moving truck. 10:41, 5 seconds. The camera zoomed, and you could almost discern the distinct cylindrical outline of the missiles under the canvas tarp. 3 seconds. The driver of the truck was still shouting into his radio, thinking he was escaping, completely blind to the 10-pound angel of death screaming towards his cargo. At 04:01 a.m., impact. The 3-pound PG-9B-shaped charge did exactly what it was designed to do. It didn't just explode. It focused all of its energy into a single, white-hot jet of molten copper traveling at nearly 25,000 feet per second. This jet, no thicker than a pencil, punched through the truck's thin canvas roof and the 20 millimeters of steel on the missile casing as if they were wet paper. The initial explosion was almost insignificant, but what happened 0.3 seconds later was the real spectacle. Solid rocket propellant, the kind packed into an S-400 missile, is incredibly stable. You can drop it, hit it, even set it on fire, and it will just burn. The one thing it cannot handle, however, is the catastrophic shock and pressure from a shaped charge detonation. The jet of molten copper acted like a hypervelocity syringe, injecting devastating energy directly into the propellant grain. The stable fuel didn't just burn, it sympathetically detonated. A chemical reaction designed to last 15 seconds was compressed into less than a second. The first missile exploded inside the truck, instantly vaporizing the vehicle and the crew. The pressure wave hit the second missile next to it. It, too, detonated, then the third and the fourth. It was a chain reaction of unimaginable violence. In 1.3 seconds, 8,000 pounds of solid rocket fuel erupted into a massive fireball, scorching the area at 5,000 degrees. At 04:05 a.m., high above, the Leica 100's camera had to automatically adjust its exposure to avoid being whited out by the sheer intensity of the blast. The other Russian trucks, which thought they were escaping, were now peppered with burning shrapnel from their own sister missiles. Now, let's do the math, because this is the beautiful part. Ukraine expended one Wild Hornet, which, including its share of the mission cost, was probably around $15,000. Russia lost one transport truck, its crew, and 4 S-400 missiles valued at $8 million. That's a return on investment of over 53,000%. Not even the best Wall Street hedge fund could give you a payday like that. The strategic fallout was immediate. The S-400 battery they were meant to supply was now not only empty, but its position had been confirmed and was now vulnerable. The hole in Crimea's air defense wasn't just a hole anymore. It was a gaping wound that Russia just proved it cannot close without paying a blood-soaked price. They didn't just lose missiles, they lost the hope of safety. So, a $280,000 operation spearheaded by a single $15,000 drone had just erased an $8 million resupply and checkmated Russia's reinforcement strategy. It proved that in modern warfare, the winner isn't always the one with the biggest, most expensive toys. It's the one who knows how to use the fog. So, what do you think? With this glaring vulnerability exposed, what should Ukraine target next? The Kerch Bridge? A naval base? Drop your theories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to see what burns in Crimea.